December 1944. The frozen Ardennes became the stage for Hitler's last gamble. Out of the mist advanced the most feared formation of the Reich, the 1st SS Panzer Division, forged in fire, ruthless in reputation, convinced they could crush anything in their path. But waiting in the snow were men who were not supposed to stand, not supposed to survive. Patton's soldiers, cold, hungry, outnumbered, were ordered to hold the line against the impossible. What followed was not just another clash of tanks and infantry. It was the moment the myth of the invincible SS shattered, when the hunters became the hunted, and history turned on the courage of a few. The shadow of Ardennes expanded. Dawn came slow and iron gray over the Ardennes on December 16, 1944. Frost glazed the spruce boughs and turned every rut into glass. The wind made a thin sound over the ridgeline, like a knife being drawn. In the dim light, a line of American foxholes, hastily chopped from the frozen ground, cut a crooked seam along a shallow rise above a Belgian lane. Beyond the lane, woods thick as a wall hid whatever was moving in there. Everyone knew something was. Captain Robert Bob Grant crouched in a funk of damp wool and tobacco inside his command hole, a poncho strung over the opening to keep out the fine snow. He was 27 and looked older in the winter light, jaw shadowed, eyes red at the corners from a night of listening. In front of him lay a grease-penciled mapboard, road nets, a creek line, a nearby hamlet, 2 possible German approach routes. He had a company on paper and 2 reinforced platoons in reality. 87 effectives after pneumonia, frostbite, and the attrition of a quiet month that turned loud overnight. A runner slid down the bank and ducked under the poncho. "Sir, Sergeant Alvarez says the tree line's breathing. You can hear engines cycling. They keep blipping them on and off." Grant nodded. "Tell him to hold his fire until he sees steel or boots. Keep the OP low. Get me battalion on the net." He reached for the SCR 300. The handset was cold enough to bite. Static hissed. A signalman in the hole next door nursed a dry cell by the flame of a covered match, trying to wake up the battery. The air smelled of cordite and damp felt pads of men and mud. "Blackjack 6, Blackjack 6, this is Blackjack 1. Intermittent engine noise, likely tracked, eastward line. No movement on the road yet. We're dug in. Out." After a beat the reply came, thready and distant. "Blackjack 1, roger. Artillery priority target on your grid confirmed. Fire missions available, ammo tight. You are to delay, repeat delay, and withdraw by bounds only if you must. Third Army is pivoting. Time is everything." Grant set the handset down and exhaled into his scarf. Third Army pivoting. Rumor made flesh. Everybody had heard it. Patton, somewhere south, had turned the whole machine on a warning and was running north like a man late to a fire. Grant could not see any of that from his hole. All he had were the seconds he could steal. A flare went up somewhere deep in the woods. Green, then gone. In the sudden quiet after, Grant could finally hear it clearly. The reptilian clatter of tracks, the cough of engines cycling rich in the cold. He crawled up to the lip of the foxhole and peered through the brush screen. The snow in the trees shifted once, twice. A line of figures appeared like smudges moving between the trunks. Snow smocks, helmets, sloped packs. They came on in short, hard movements, then stopped. One man knelt and peered through a pair of field glasses. Somewhere to the left, a metallic squeal. The woods were producing hardware. Sergeant Thomas "Tommy" Alvarez slid into the hole beside him, breath pluming. "Sir, you seeing it?" "I'm seeing it. Panzer spear. Or a feeler." Alvarez's teeth clicked once when he spoke. His jaw never quite stopped shivering anymore. "Treat it like the spear," Grant said. "We're here to make them late. Nothing fancy. MG teams hold for my go. Bazookas only at 30 yards or less. Anyone goes down, leave the souvenirs. We're trading minutes, not medals." Alvarez grinned without humor. "Roger that." They moved the word. The line contracted a little, pulling its elbows in around the lane, and the woods kept walking closer. On the left, a narrow pasture led down to a creek. The engineers had sunk 24 mines into the lane and scattered more among the fence posts with their gloves off until their fingers went white. Now the mine tape hung in little flags under a drift. To the right, the rise fell away into a tangle of brush. Good for infiltration, bad for clear fields of fire. They had strung trip flares in that brush and prayed the Germans would be clumsy. At 0712, the first trip flare hissed and flared white behind their right squad. Dark figures flinched in the glare and dropped. The nearest bar coughed 2 short bursts, spitting brass. 2 men folded. A third rolled and disappeared. A sharp rip of machine gun fire answered from the woods. High, angry, aimed at the muzzle flash. Snow thumped off branches. The lane filled with the flat cracks of rifles and the steady, unshowy knocking of an M1919. Steady! Grant yelled into the hole and up to the men crouched along the lane. Pick targets. They've got depth. Don't burn it down. The next minutes were loud and small. Men working actions, shouts carried on their bellies down the ditch, grenades thrown with mittened hands, the thud of their own mortar dropping a couple of rounds into the tree line. A figure in a white smock rolled out from behind a stump, lifted a tube to his shoulder. Panzer Faust! Someone screamed, and a geyser of snow and dirt leapt from where a Sherman would have been if Grant had had any. Armor noises grew. A squat, dark shape slid between the trees, a half-track, nose down, snow falling off its hood in sheets. Behind it, lower and meaner, came the shape they dreaded. Sloped armor, panther low. The lead tank paused to nose the air like a hunting cat. Its engine note changed. Men held their breath, aware of every metal thing touching their bodies. Grant jammed the handset against his scarf. Fire mission, grid is briefed. Tree burst if you can, they're in the pines, enemy armor sighted, make it quick. Blackjack 1, shot, over. Shot out. They waited in a kind of suspended time. The tank's turret moved, left, then a click right, as if it sensed mines looking at it. The forests of the Ardennes held the sound of the first American shells for a heartbeat, and then they came down like God striking a match. Tree bursts are ugly. Hot steel scissoring from trunks, splinters like darts, men cut from above. The lane filled with powder smoke and sawdust taste. Men cheered, then swallowed it, then fired again. Hold the right. Alvarez shouted from a shell scrape. Watch your left. He moved like a man standing in a furnace, knowing that stillness meant cooking. A German MG-42 opened up from the opposite bank of the creek. The 42 sound was like tearing screens. A private 2 holes down popped once, twice, and slumped without drama into the side of his foxhole. His buddy swore into the scarf around his mouth and shifted to cover the gap. Everybody's world contracted to the 6 yards of snow they were responsible for. Grant checked his watch. 0741. He made himself write it on the pad. Time bought. 29 minutes. He had promised battalion an hour if he could make it. The sky stayed low, the snow began again. Big wet flakes that stuck to the muzzles and beaded on eyelashes. A second set of artillery rounds came in long, then corrected, then walked the lane the way a hunter walks a hedgerow. The half-track jerked, stalled, and sagged against a stump, its crew scrambling out into a half-light of splinters and tracer. The Panther eased back, then forward, unwilling to commit. A bazooka team let it come. 50 yards, 40, 30. Then the loader tapped the gunner's shoulder and the gunner's mitten slipped and the backblast filled the foxhole with hot needles and the rocket slid away and smacked shoulder plate instead of lower hull. The Panther stopped, offended. Then hosed the position with coax until the snow above that hole thumped down in a rotten shelf. The loader came out again and dragged the gunner by the straps, both men moving like men in a nightmare, too slow, while the turret tracked. A rifleman down the line put 2 rounds into the tank commander's face when he popped up to shout, and the commander fell into the cupola without ceremony. In the sudden confusion, the bazooka team crawled behind a stump and thanked whatever saints there are for clumsy miracles. The radio spat again. Blackjack 1, this is Blackjack 6. Third Army elements confirmed moving to your relief axis. Maintain contact and delay. If pressed, fall back to phase line blue. Report when you displace. Grant looked down the line. He could see, with the miserable clarity that comes in command, where the weak points were going to open. He put his hand on Alvarez's shoulder and squeezed. When the woods spit them onto the lane, we give them one more volley and then we peel. Left squad bounds first to the stone wall. Right squad covers. Then we trade. Keep it orderly. Time, not ground. Alvarez nodded and slid away, low and fast. The woods obliged. A file of white-smocked figures broke the edge of the trees at a trot. Machine pistols lifted. Behind them, the Panther committed. Nose coming out onto the lane like a shark's head breaking surface. Now, Grant shouted, and the lane erupted. Every gun that still had a sight picture spat. A German fell as if a marionette string had been cut. Someone's grenade landed exactly where it ought to, behind the second man in line. When the smoke rolled over them, Grant could no longer count bodies, only motions. "Left peel," he yelled, and the first squad loosed a final burst and scrambled back in a broken crouch, slipping, grabbing, swearing. A man lost his glove and left it. Another stopped to haul a friend who had no breath to ask. They did it twice, 3 times, the line shortening, each bound measured in yards and paid for in seconds. An American mortar team worked like a pair of old men splitting wood, slow and exact, dropping 2 more he onto the lane to make the Panther hesitate again. The second bazooka team, boys really, let it close and then put a rocket where the side armor bent, and for a beautiful, indecent instant the tank bloomed orange inside, smoke frosting out of the driver's visor like a sigh. Men shouted without words. The Panther's engine wound down into a groan. It sat there, hulking and suddenly harmless, and the lane felt bigger. Phase line blew. Grant rasped into the handset. Displacing now. We held them 42 minutes. Say again 4-2. Copy. Blackjack 1. 42. Artillery will cover your withdrawal. As if cued, the tree line behind them walked with fire again. The Germans, their first bite broken off, pressed forward in jerks and then stopped each time the shells arrived. The half-track burned with a wet crackle. A man in a white smock crawled toward a friend and then didn't. The snow took the color and kept it. They fell back through the hedgerow and over the little stone wall that had looked decorative yesterday and life-saving today. A medic with a Red Cross band on his sleeve crawled the opposite direction, into the shell-chewed forward positions to check for breathing where he knew there wasn't any. Nobody stopped him. At the new line, Alvarez swore his squads back into order, checked faces with mittened hands, thumped magazines, counted heads without writing the numbers down. Grant watched him and felt the line take a new shape around his sergeant's competence. He checked his watch again, 0810. He wrote that down too. Time bought. 58 minutes. Behind the ridge, somewhere beyond the white and gray, trucks were growling north, and tank engines were starting, and men in other uniforms were climbing onto armor and checking their periscopes and slamming turret hatches. He could not see them, but he could feel the big machine turning, could hear in the distance, imagined or real, the first deep coughs of Shermans and tank destroyers being goaded into the cold. A lull fell, brittle and brief. In it Grant could hear the small sounds, a man stifling a cough, the crunch of a boot heel on a frozen clod, the metallic tick of a barrel cooling. He looked down at his map and up at the woods and back again. The day had not yet truly begun, and already it had taken what it wanted. He tightened the scarf at his throat and keyed the handset one more time. Blackjack 6. Blackjack 1. Still here. Roger, Blackjack 1, came the answer. Warmer now for no good reason. Hold what you can. Third Army is coming. Grant looked at Alvarez, who was watching the tree line as if he could will it to hold still. They're coming, he said. Alvarez nodded without looking away. Then we just have to keep the welcome mat out a little longer. Out in the woods, engines coughed and caught. The tree line breathed again. The day moved. And along a frozen Belgian lane, men who weren't supposed to live through it settled their rifles into their shoulders and made ready to steal a few more minutes from history. Clash at the ridge, condensed. The morning after the delaying fight, the Ardennes was a cauldron of sound. Tracks grinding, shells whistling, men shouting through the frost. Patton's relief columns had finally arrived. Elements of the 4th and 11th Armored Divisions pushed north, their Shermans lining up along a wooded ridge. Below, the 1st SS Panzer Division prepared its next thrust. Lieutenant Henry Collins, perched in a Sherman, scanned through icy periscopes. "They're coming straight at us," he muttered. The 1st Panthers crept out of the fog, flanked by infantry in snow smocks. Behind Collins, U.S. artillery rumbled. Tree bursts erupted above the German advance, shattering timber and men alike. The clash was immediate. Shermans fired from hull-down positions, knocking out the lead half-track and stalling the column. SS infantry tried to flank through the brush, only to be cut down by machine gun fire from dug-in GIs. A Panther managed to score a hit, blowing a Sherman apart in a plume of smoke, but American bazooka teams darted forward, striking back at close range. Patton himself arrived at a forward command post, barking orders through the din: "Shift the line. Don't let them wrap around your flank. Hold them here." His presence steadied the men. Radios crackled with his clipped commands. By noon the field was chaos. Burning armor littered the snow, black smoke drifting into the gray sky. Yet the SS momentum slowed. Captain Grant's battered survivors rejoined, hitting the Germans' flank and cutting their supply track. Under relentless pressure, artillery above, tanks ahead, infantry gnawing their sides, the 1st SS began to pull back. As dusk fell, silence returned in jagged pieces. The ridge belonged to the Americans, though at a terrible cost. Patton surveyed the field, wrecked Shermans, shattered trees, German armor smoldering in the snow. His voice was low, almost private. They weren't supposed to survive. But they did. The 1st SS had finally met resistance that did not yield. The myth of invincibility was beginning to crack. AI Spurs. Develop Chapter 3. ChatGPT as Spurs. Chapter 3. Aftermath and Reckoning. The ridge was quiet now, except for the groans of the wounded and the thud of boots as medics moved among them. The acrid smoke of burning fuel hung low over the snow. Sherman hulls still smoldered, their metal creaking in the cold, while German Panthers lay gutted and silent, black silhouettes against the white ground. The fight had ended, but the field was not at peace. Captain Grant walked the line with his scarf pulled high against the wind. His men were exhausted, faces gray from cold and shock. They had lost too many, but the line still existed, living proof that the 1st SS could be stopped. At a shallow foxhole he paused. Sergeant Alvarez crouched beside a fallen private, folding the young soldier's hands across his chest. 19 years old, Alvarez muttered. Barely had time to learn the trade. Grant placed a hand on his sergeant's shoulder. Words seemed useless. At the aid station, American and German wounded lay under the same canvas. An American medic wrapped bandages around a captured SS trooper's head. The German whispered hoarsely, Kämpft wie Teufel. You fight like devils." The medic simply tightened the knot and moved on. There was no time for hatred in the face of so much pain. Far to the rear, Patton's intelligence officers sifted through captured maps and orders. The picture was clear. The attacking regiment of the 1st SS had been gutted. Reports filtered up that their communications were in chaos, units scattered, morale shaken. For the first time, the vaunted Leibstandard had stumbled. That evening, Patton called his senior staff into a farmhouse commandeered as headquarters. The fire in the hearth did little to warm the room. He leaned over the campaign map, tapping the ridge with his riding crop. This was supposed to be their hammer blow. Instead, we broke it across our knee. Gentlemen, tomorrow we drive them. Don't give them rest, don't give them air. They bleed now, make it count. Outside, snow fell again, covering wreckage and bodies alike. For the men who had fought, the victory felt hollow. Yet the truth was undeniable. They had survived the day the 1st SS came for them. And in surviving, they had planted the first real doubt in the German offensive. The Ardennes was still burning, but a shift had begun. The SS aura of invincibility was cracked, and Patton's soldiers, cold, battered, but unbroken, stood ready to push the advantage. Turning the tide. Morning broke pale and brittle, the sky a flat sheet of iron above the Ardennes. Snow crusted over the battlefield, muting the wreckage of the day before. In the American lines, engines coughed to life. Crews climbed back into Shermans and half-tracks, their faces drawn but resolved. The word had passed through the ranks. Patton was pushing them forward. Lieutenant Collins wiped frost from his periscope and watched the columns form up. "Time to move," he told his gunner. The men were tired, but the mood had changed. Yesterday they had fought to survive. Today they would fight to drive the enemy back. At first the push was measured. Engineers cleared paths through mined lanes, infantry advanced cautiously under covering fire, and artillery pounded suspected strongpoints. But when reconnaissance reported the SS retreating in disorder, Patton gave the order for a full thrust. Shermans rolled out of the Treline, their treads grinding through ice and mud. P-47 Thunderbolts swept overhead, strafing German convoys trying to pull back. Columns of smoke rose from burning half-tracks as American armor punched deep into the enemy's flank. The 1st SS tried to rally. A handful of Panthers fired from a ridge, knocking out 2 Shermans. But Patton's gunners had learned their lessons. Their next volley struck true, leaving German tanks burning on the slope. Infantry in snow smocks surrendered in clusters, their weapons abandoned in the drifts. Captain Grant, leading his battered company, moved through a village littered with abandoned German vehicles. His men cleared doorways and cellars, finding more prisoners than resistance. For the first time in weeks, Grant felt the weight lift. "We've got them running," Alvarez said at his side. Grant nodded, though he knew the cost they had paid for this moment. By late afternoon, the American advance had secured crossroads and high ground once thought lost. Reports streamed into Patton's headquarters. Enemy retreat, enemy collapse, enemy unable to reorganize. The general stood over his map, boots muddy, eyes bright with that fierce spark his men recognized. "The 1st SS met their match here," he declared. "And they won't recover." Night fell, but the sense of momentum remained. Fires burned in the distance, and the roads behind the front filled with German prisoners under guard. Around campfires, American soldiers spoke in low voices, half in disbelief. They had faced the feared Leibstandard and lived. More than that, they had forced it to retreat. The Battle of the Bulge was far from over, but the spell was broken. In that frozen corner of Belgium, Patton's men had shown that even the most feared of Hitler's divisions could be stopped. And from that day on, the war's balance tilted. The 1st SS had met their match, and the men who weren't supposed to survive had begun the march to victory.